What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Halftime with K Bizzy. I'm your host, K Bizzy, and of course, we are bringing you another great episode. Today, we have dusT sitting down with us, and he will be talking with us about all types of crazy cool stuff. His come up in Counter-Strike, how he found it, which was a really cool story, his career as a whole, and we talk a lot about the industry and the reality of being a freelance talent for tournament organizers and stuff, and kind of how competitive the atmosphere can be. We all know in every type of environment surrounding Counter-Strike, it's very competitive, and when you're a freelance member of desk talent or a caster or anything of that sort, it's a different type of competitive level. So we talk about the reality of that today, which I think is a very big eye-opener to some people, hopefully. And yeah, I think you guys are going to enjoy today's episode. If you guys are new to the platform, we do episodes every single Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern. We have plenty of episodes with awesome guests prior to today's episode, so I definitely recommend you go check out the playlist located on the channel and find yourself some cool stuff to watch after this one. My links as well as dusT's links are in the description, so I highly recommend you go support not only myself, but please go support dusT as well. He will definitely appreciate it, I'm sure. And if you guys choose to support me, I appreciate it too. Like the video, comment down below, let me know what you think. I always love reading what you guys have to say. Subscribe to the channel if you're watching on YouTube. And yeah, that's pretty much all I got for you guys. We'll catch you on the outro. Enjoy today's episode. I appreciate you showing some interest and wanting to do this, man. I've been excited to get to pick your brain about some stuff about what you do for your career and everything. So I appreciate the
Sure.
time.
Yeah, no worries, man.
So let's talk about the most important question. How did you get involved in Counter-Strike? How did you find it once upon a time?
Oh man. So to make a long story short, I was into PC gaming from a pretty young age, but not Counter Strike. I remember there was this neighbor that used to babysit me when I was a kid. When my parents had to, work or whatever, and he had a PC and he had the original Rainbow Six.
Oh,
And
nice.
then the expansion to Rainbow Six, which I think it was called like Eagle Watch was the name of that expansion. And so I used to play that. It was like single player, like hostage rescue, like FPS game, right? But then from that kind of sparked my interest. I eventually got my own PC that was like decent when I was in high school, or actually middle school, really. And I started playing Medal of Honor Allied Assault when that came out in the early 2000s, and I was super into that for a while. Um, and then what happened is some buddies of mine that were in middle school played Halo, but on PC, which I know people are like, what? Because Halo was obviously extremely popular on Xbox, particularly Halo 1 and Halo 2, NLG, all those things that go around it, some of those old school teams. But there was a version that you could play on the PC for Combat Evolved, which was the first Halo. And it was dog shit. Like looking back on it, it was awful. But in the moment, like we're all like a small, like niche group of people who are playing this game online, and we're all super in love with it. And the way I can explain it is Halo is a hit scan FPS game, right? You put your crosshair on the target, you shoot, you either hit them or you don't based on your aim. Whereas the net code was so bad in the Halo PC game that depending on how much ping you had, depending on how much you had to lead your targets, almost like it was projectile FPS.
Oh, God.
But a lot of people like coped by just basically saying, "Oh, well, you just have to like learn how to lead better. Like, that's a skill you have to learn." And they were like super protective of, that making it some type of, skill ceiling thing, whatever. Anyway, the point is I played, Halo PC on like these different online ladders. One was called like clanwars.com. TWC was one, clan base was another, though they were mostly European. And point being is that these guys I played Halo with in middle school, they eventually started playing Counter-Strike Source, but they would basically do it where it's like they play Halo all day, and then at night they would play like Zombie Mod or like Jailbreak or like these different mods that kind of Surf, Scout Knives, all that jazz. And
Okay.
so that's how I got introduced to Counter-Strike Source. This is probably I think 2006 or so is when I got Steam and got Counter-Strike Source. And so I got introduced to Counter-Strike basically through my friends playing Zombie Mod, Jailbreak, all these different things. And so I would play all these different mini games, but obviously eventually you start expanding, playing dusT2 Deathmatch or, just casual dusT2 servers, or whatever the case may be. And then eventually I did get into, playing it a little bit more seriously. I did start competing, and, back then there was like Cal was like kind of the main league, but then eventually that turns into, ESEA sprouting up their league, and then CEVO had their leagues as well. And I wound up getting to like, I guess what you would say is a semi-pro level in Counter-Strike Source. Um, Now there's so many different leagues, right? Like if you look at
Yeah.
the ESEA system for North America, you have open, intermediate, main, advanced. Then back in the day they had like Mountain Dew League or Premier, and then it turned into like Invite, which is actually the pro league. But then you got EPL, which kind of branched off and became what used to be ESEA Invite. So I played at the main level, which was just below pro at the time, just below Invite at the time. I played on a couple different teams at the main level, and one of the teams I played on actually did make it into Invite, but I was like their sixth man once they got into pro. So I got to like a decent level, but I wasn't great. But that's kind of how I got into Counter-Strike, and then eventually that's also what kind of exposed me to the idea of esports commentary. It was kind of through that way.
That's interesting because usually it's the complete opposite. When you start playing Counter Strike of any kind, you're looking at deathmatch, you're looking at competitive, casual. But to go to like the zombie mod or surfing or whatever, and then figure out like, wait, this isn't even the actual game. I've never heard that. That's really unique.
Yeah, that's how it happened.
And then when you finally get to play deathmatch and well, for me it was like I started playing deathmatch. I played for like 2 months straight, just thinking Counter Strike Global Offensive was like Call of Duty Team Deathmatch. I'm like, what, like this game's fun, but like, why does everyone love it so much? I don't understand. Okay, the cases, the skins, sure, but I was nervous to play competitive, and then when I finally loaded into the server in competitive, I was like, this is a game changer, and it's I've talked to so many people about it. It's such a simple concept. Like Counter Strike as a whole is such a simple concept, but the skill ceiling is just never ending, and we're finding that out like almost every day. It feels like when you watch pro scene.
Oh, 100%. Again, I went from playing Halo, which was, a no recoil game, to all of a sudden recoil control being super paramount, as well as, going from a game like Halo where you can move and shoot no problem to all of a sudden you having to learn how to counter strafe and like shoot on a dime, like in between that moment where you are perfectly still for just a second. And so, yeah, it was definitely like a huge learning curve, but I really enjoyed it, and it was also one of those things where Counter Strike, I eventually saw kind of how big it was, over time as I got more and more exposed to it. I saw how it was this international thing, how there were LAN events, for top level teams, and there were actually people making money, and as my ventures in playing Halo on PC died away because obviously that was never gonna hold. I fell more and more in love with Counter Strike, and that kind of just took over, and that became the thing that I basically played religiously, through high school and college and things that nature, and then eventually got exposed to the idea of broadcasting and all that.
Awesome. So like, where did your like journey in esports begin? Like when you started, was there like a certain tournament you watched? Was there a certain player or team that you liked? Like where did that kind of sprout from?
So as a player, again, it was just friends of mine eventually formed like small teams in Cal Open and ESEA Open, and I would play with them and compete. And again, I eventually worked my way through intermediate and through main, and again, one of the teams I played on eventually qualified for invite. And so I kind of just got involved through just linking up with people as I was playing the game, as far as just playing online leagues and ladders, basically for Cal, then ESEA and CEVO. And so that's kind of how my esports journey started with that, was just going from, those casual game modes I talked about earlier to actually like slowly but surely just building my way into actually playing the normal 5v5 format. But then as far as like if you're talking about like a broadcasting perspective in esports, basically I remember when I was competing, in main and intermediate and stuff like that for ESEA had a LAN, at the end of every season where they had Team Fortress 2, Counter Strike 1.6, Counter Strike Source. That was the three games at ESEA LAN, and they would broadcast it. And they had, I think it was like Jimmy Wisenhunt, Corey Dunn. Corey Dunn is probably a name people will recognize, who were kind of the main commentators for the 1.6 stuff, because 1.6 was kind of the more popular version of Counter Strike that was being broadcasted. And I saw that, and then kind of around the same time, I also saw CGS, on Direct TV, and seeing those guys commentate Counter Strike, and for all the issues that the CGS had and all of its failures, like it did kind of expose me at least to the idea of, holy crap, people actually broadcast this game and talk about it and commentate it like you would see commentators, do in the NFL or college football, whatever the case may be. And that just kind of piqued my interest, that holy crap, like that's a whole world I didn't really even know existed, coming from a casual player point of view. And what happened is while I was in high school, I just started reaching out to like anybody I knew of that was at all related to esports broadcasting or Counter-Strike broadcasting particularly, to see if I could somehow just get involved as a commentator. And back then, this is before Twitch, this is before Justin TV. And so there was a lot of hurdles you would have to cross to even be able to run a broadcast, right? Like you'd have to host a server yourself, you'd have to host it on your own website to be able to host an actual video stream. In some cases, you would just only do an audio stream, and people would have to, go into like, HLTV or GoTV and like watch it, but then listen to your audio on like a different plugin on like Winamp or something like that. And so basically, I just kind of started commentating that way, because no one else was really doing it. I would find like the one group of people who actually had the know-how to operate a stream, and I would just, volunteer to come in and do some play-by-play commentary. Basically, is how it started. And the first one I worked with was a company called GameFire, which they had their own website, gamefire.com or whatever. And so they would broadcast these games, and I would come in and do play-by-play commentary for it. This was like for Cal and stuff like that back in the day. And then eventually I joined this one called Ponish TV. After that did basically the same thing after GameFire died. Then Ponish TV eventually died. Because again, none of these people are making any money, and they're having to pay out of pocket to like host these websites and host these servers to host these, streams that is like a ton of data that you're, transferring by running your own stream on your own website. And so these companies obviously eventually keep folding. And then I work with another company called eRev. And then the one that really finally got me into like doing this as some form of job was I worked with a company called Source Collective, and eventually it became Esports Collective. And this is when Justin TV and Twitch did kind of start coming into the picture, where you could actually run streams a little bit easier. And we did basically games for ESEA, because that was kind of the main league at the time for North America. At this point, Cal had already faded away. And essentially, I was just a play-by-play commentator for this company. And eventually, ESEA picked up this company to become the official ESEA TV team. And that is basically where, you know, broadcasting really started happening, regularly for Counter-Strike. And it started as like a match of the week system, where they would just broadcast like one night a week. They picked the best matches and scheduled them on this one night, and you just cover those games. But as like CS:GO Lounge came into play and people started to see how valuable consistent content was, all of a sudden, we were broadcasting every night that we could, North American matches. Europe had their own ESEA TV team, one of which was actually Anders. Pugcast was his
The
original
GOAT.
Twitch TV name. He comes in, he does kind of the European side of ESEA, eventually tagging up with Similar and, doing his whole thing with Nip, and then eventually on his own. And then we were doing the North American side, right? Myself and several others. So that's kind of how it all unfolded, really.
That's awesome. Sorry to interrupt. I'm gonna tilt my blinds because I look like Casper the Ghost right now.
All good, bro.
I still look like Casper the Ghost. Oh my god. Okay. No more sunlight. Yeah, but I really think that it's interesting how especially the European side and then the NA side like kind of mesh together, because like we all know European Counter-Strike has always been 10 steps ahead of NA. And you got guys like Anders who are just staples. And like I remember watching Counter-Strike for the first time, like esports. I think it was 2016. I forget which tournament, but I remember it was Virtus Pro and they were playing on Cobblestone, and I was just watching and I was blown away. I was like fully wrapping myself into this whole different ecosystem of Counter-Strike. And it's really cool to see it all unfold, and to look back at where it was and to see where it's at now. I mean, it's just incredible. And I never really went to any lands as a kid, so the first land I ever went to was Launders Land 2 here in Toronto.
Okay.
And that was my first time in a land setting. And like, wow, like the energy in there, like hearing the everything, just it's so awesome. And to see how it's developed is just absolutely incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, it went from, mostly online and like really no broadcasting to having some broadcasting and being a little bit more prevalent. And then, the first lanes we were doing, particularly with CSGO, when that came out in like, late 2012, when that beta launched and we actually started transitioning into CSGO. I mean, in North America, we were doing these in hotel ballrooms. There was no
Oh wow.
spectators. I mean, it was just like you would get the convention tables or whatever. You'd throw some tablecloths on them. You'd set up a bunch of PCs, and we were running a LAN in a hotel ballroom. I'll never forget it,
Wow.
bro. Like all these ESCA LANs back in the day for the North American side were all in like this one DoubleTree hotel in Dallas Fort Worth, and it was in a ballroom. And that it was just us. It was just the staff and the players. That was it. There was no spectators. It was all streamed, online, of course, on Twitch and things of that nature. But yeah, and to see it go from that to eventually ESCA on the North American side eventually started having European teams come over, because they would do like a global invite league where basically they'd have like, the two regional leagues and the best four from each region would come together for one big global LAN. And that kind of started happening, I think maybe around 2013, 2014 timeframe is when that kind of happened. But then obviously on the EU side of things, you already have things kicking up with like different DreamHack events or, ESL doing stuff, and EW or ESWC was like a big thing at the time as well. Some of those, Esports World Cup events and so on and so forth, and eventually emerges into what it is, kind of today, watching all these different companies pop up and come together and all that jazz. And now you kind of got what you got now.
For sure. And the casting part really just piques my interest so much. Like, you know, if I'm watching hockey so big here, like if I'm watching hockey, like I'm fully invested in the game itself. Obviously, I'm listening to the, commentators and stuff too. But I feel like most times people are watching any type of traditional sport, basketball, football, any of that jazz. If you're watching the sport, I feel like 90% of the time people aren't like, being a like, part of the broadcast, whether it be on the desk, whether it be a commentator or something, I feel like people don't usually, you know, have an interest toward that and want to, pursue something like that. So when you started to make that transition and you started to go to these hotel ballrooms, which is crazy to think that that's where it started. That's wild. Um, how did you kind of develop yourself to get to a casting level where you would take this seriously and you might not even know if it pans out in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think early on it was pretty easy because I was just totally captivated that it was even a thing. I never once in my life thought that I was going to be a commentator for anything, let alone esports, right? And I think what it was is that, you know, I mean, because I mean, again, like through high school, you're obviously in high school, and I was a pretty good student. Like I was kind of one of those guys that could, get by with straight A's by, barely putting forth any effort and just being able to, show up, take my test, make sure I did my homework, and I was good. So I had a lot of free time to obviously play and get more and more into the broadcasting side of it. And then, in college, obviously I was focused on getting my degree and things of that nature, but I still, had a lot of time available between being a student. I was working full time, but then I was also, doing this gaming thing. And so my point is like early on, I had kind of the safety net, I guess you could say, of not really having to worry about, the standard financial responsibilities that an adult has to worry about. I had this, several year long stretch where I could kind of dabble into doing esports stuff without really having to worry about the pitfalls of it not bringing me any money. And you know, the thing is, I couldn't even tell you what made me actually want to commentate. Again, I never had any aspirations to be a commentator of any sort. Dude, when I first started college, I had an early acceptance to medical school. I was going to be a doctor. Like
Oh, so
that's
that's
what I
like
was.
way different league
Oh,
altogether.
dude. And so basically, like through my GPA and like my ACT scores and interviews and stuff that I did, my university offered like an early acceptance program into the medical school. And so as long as you hit like a certain MCAT score, which is the entrance exam for medical school, like you had to hit a minimum score, but if you did it, you were guaranteed a spot without having to like apply an interview and stuff like that. They were giving it to you in advance. So I had that going for me going into college. And so that's what I thought I was going to do. Within 1 year, I moved into computer science instead of doing the medical thing for various reasons. And then I eventually pivoted into like communications and history. And then eventually I got a master's degree in history in the end, bro. Like I was all over the place education wise, right? But all the while, again, like my mind was never really on I'm going to be a commentator or a broadcaster, and I can't tell you what actually I don't remember like what made me do it, but I think it was just I saw this game that I loved. I saw that people were talking about this game, and I was like, hey, that's pretty neat. I could do that. And then I basically just, again, hit up people. And back then it was very easy to get opportunities to commentate because no one was getting paid. And, there wasn't a lot of people that were clamoring to do it at the time because most people didn't even know how to go about it. So by just being basically proactive, reaching out to people and saying, hey, I want to commentate your stuff. Is there any room for me? And just being persistent, that would get your foot in the door right away, because they were like itching for people basically that could show up consistently and actually come and do it, right? And so that's kind of how I got into like the volunteering aspect. The first few years of commentary, I wasn't making any money. I mean, I think I started commentating to some degree probably in like 2008, and I didn't get my first like money until maybe 2011, 2012.
Wow.
And even then it was like nothing burgers. Like we were getting paid like a little bit of money per best of 3 we covered online. And for the first lands I was going to, I wasn't getting paid. Like the ESEA lands I was going to early in the day, I didn't get paid for those. Like our payment
Wow.
was our flight and our hotel room and the fact that they would give you some food while you were there. Right? Again, it wasn't really until much later on, like 2013, 2014, when I started doing stuff with some other companies that actually started getting like day rates, and it actually became a thing. So yeah, like as far as what helped me early on was that I was kind of there at the ground floor, particularly at CS:GO. I mean, I was already doing a bunch of stuff for Counter-Strike Source and 1.6 before Go even came out. So once Go came out, I was on the ground floor of it, and the fact that I was just available and passionate and persistent, that gave me opportunities to do commentary. And I mean, I honestly didn't really even get that far as a commentator, right? Like I guess to some degree I started doing, some DreamHack opens and some stuff like that. I was never really at the tier one. And then eventually I started doing desk analysis, and I don't know, it all got tangled up, and it was a very weird and winding path, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And like at the beginning too, I couldn't imagine what the transition would be like. Maybe you could tell me, but from Source to CS:GO when it came out, I got into CS:GO in 2015. So I mean, I've heard stories, I don't know firsthand, but a lot of people say CS:GO was pretty tragic when it came out, pretty similar to how CS2 was when it launched. So when, you're going from Source and 1.6 being the biggest, like the eyes are all focused on them. When CS:GO comes out and is an absolute dumpster fire, did that kind of like shift your vision? Like maybe I shouldn't be focusing on this. This might not have a future.
Yeah, I mean, there was obviously a lot of issues with CS:GO when it first came out, but I kind of, because I was already working with ESCA, I kind of already knew that their vision, their plan at the time was to completely pivot to focus on CS:GO. And so because I knew that they were going to do that, I knew that, hey, at least I have this one outlet that I'm going to be able to do stuff with this game going forward. And, slowly but surely, ESCA was still kind of offering the ability to play competitive in 1.6 in Source, but the, pro divisions for their lands, eventually just became CS:GO only. In fact, I'll tell you this one wild story. So in late 2012, when the CS:GO beta first came out, you had a situation where, again, at the SCA LAN in Dallas, we had, and we had the TF2 still, we had CS 1.6 and CS Source, and everybody played, those lands, right? But then what happened was, is like when the grand finals of Source was over and the 1.6 finals were over, all of a sudden we had a 3-team CS:GO LAN at the very end of the event. And what you
Ew.
saw happen was like players that were playing on different 1.6 and Source teams would be like, okay, cool, had fun playing this tournament with you guys, and they had different teams that they played for in CS:GO. So the biggest example is you had Team Dynamic, which was like considered the best North American Counter-Strike Source team for a while by a lot of people. Some debate here and there, but for the most part, they were kind of the guys, right? And you basically had back then on the Counter-Strike Source team, I believe it was like uh AZK and Adren, which obviously people will know Adren because he coached for Liquid, all that stuff like that. You had AZK and Adren were like the two oppers because double op was really popular in Counter Strike Source. You had Pex, which is this Canadian player who was the in-game leader of the team, and then you had, I think it was Anger and Volcano were the other two people on the team, and they had some other people that played for Dynamic over the years. I can't remember, but anyway, so they were Team Dynamic for Source, right? But then for 1.6, you had like Swag and all these other kids that were playing for like non-sponsored teams, basically, right? And they played their 1.6 LAN. Well, all of a sudden for the CS:GO LAN, Dynamic, I think, either wins or comes second place in Source. Swag's team, I think, wins the NA side of 1.6. And then all of a sudden, Anger and Volcano take a hike. And then Swag and this other kid named Kiko were the fourth and fifth of Team Dynamic CS:GO. So
What?
they were playing two different events in the same event, basically, right? And so there was 3 CS:GO teams that played this, weird format with only 3 teams. And that was the very first, I don't know if that was the first ever CSGO LAN period, but it was definitely the first one in North America. And this was still the beta, basically, right? But then the next year, when they made the first invite league for CSGO for NA, they basically invited all the top source teams, all the top 1.6 teams, and then they invited a team that was really good at some free online FPS that at the time, I can't remember what it was. It's like, it was where Skadoodle and all those guys came from. It was like some free online FPS, like Valiant Arms or some weird name game. I can't remember the name of it. And they invited these guys over to try to create like this. Okay, we're going to invite this team from a completely different first-person shooter, but they're interested in Counter-Strike. Let's invite them into this invite league, and that's what became Curse. What was the name of that team? And so it was just wild, bro. It was like really, really wild early on. But I guess to answer your question with CSGO, like, yeah, I had my concerns, but I knew I at least had this one outlet through ESCA that was committed to doing stuff for the game. And then on top of that, I was still in school, right? I didn't graduate with my master's degree until 2015. So I was basically kind of just like, I can keep doing this on the side. And then once I graduate, then I will have to make a decision on whether or not I continue to keep pursuing this or whether I go get a traditional job or not. And I guess in my case, luckily I got some opportunities early in 2016 that kind of gave me a way to keep going and keep my interest in the game, basically.
And that's kind of what I wanted to touch on next because, as CSGO developed and it was, established as not a dumpster fire of a game and it actually got better, the amount of eyes that, just locked on a Counter-Strike Global Offensive, like it blew up like a lot. So I'm kind of curious to know about like how competitive did the environment of like, being a caster or transitioning to a desk analyst, how competitive did that become? And how did you end up taking it to the next level of, getting your eyes or getting the eyes of big tournament organizers on you?
Yeah, so basically what happened is as CS:GO kind of kept chugging along and I was again still in school until I graduated in 2015. When 2016 rolled around, that was kind of the year where I had to decide, am I going to just take my degree and go get a job, or am I going to keep trying to do this esports thing, or am I going to do a combination of both? I wasn't really sure, but essentially at the very beginning of 2016, this is when Sivo partnered with MLG for their partner pro league, and then it ultimately led also to the different minors for the majors and stuff like that, like for MLG. And so that was an opportunity right away where I knew I was going to get some online work. I was going to get to work their LAN final, and I was going to make some money doing that, basically. And so I did that. And then MLG eventually had to step away from Counter Strike because of Activision Blizzard purchase and all that stuff like that. And so Sivo then winds up partnering with this company called Gfinity, which is a UK based esports thing. And I worked on that for several months and went to the LAN finals there. Then at the LAN finals of that event is where I met Richard Lewis and Thorne for the first time in person. And it was just happenstance, like what happens after this, bro. Like it's actually kind of crazy. So we're at this Sivo Gfinity Pro League LAN final, right? And this is early 2016, like summer. And I remember I was commentating that event, and back then, like the set duos weren't as much of a thing. You'd see there were some, but like you kind of see a lot of people just kind of rotate and casting with whoever. So at this event, I casted with Launders, I casted with Vince or Metis, whatever you might know him as, Jackie. These different people that I was like just rotating casting with. But what happened is the analyst that's at that event was Puckett. I don't know if you know who Puckett is from MLG. He was the host of the desk, and then it was Richard Lewis and Thorne were the two analysts. Well, something happened where I can't remember what happened, but Puckett had to leave early for some reason. And so Richard Lewis took over the hosting slot. So that meant that they needed another guy to go on the desk to be like the second analyst next to Thorin. And so what happened is essentially we rotated. Like I did a couple of desk segments with them. I think Launders did a couple. And then I think Ryu, who was like the Selfless Gaming owner, that had Kusta, like when he was first coming up, and they were like enemy, I think. They were actually at the LAN. Their team was competing. And he was like their coach. And so he came in and did some desk segments out of nowhere. I don't know. It was really random. But anyway, so that was how I first got a chance to work on an analyst desk, right? And wildly enough, that parlayed me into 2 months later being a part of E League Season 1. Because
Wow.
basically with E-League Season 1, they had a plan of how they want to do that broadcast, and I was not a part of that plan, by the way. Richard was going to be the host, and then the analysts were going to be Moses and Thorin. Well, Thorin was having visa issues to be able to get there, or things were being delayed, whatever. It eventually got sorted out, and Thorin eventually winds up being there for the majority of that season, the next season, the majors, all that jazz, right? But for those first few weeks, they needed someone to fill in until Thorin could get his paperwork and stuff sorted out. And so they brought in me and Mo. We're like the two analysts they brought in basically, and they rotated us. And so that's kind of what got my name out there more. I think was basically doing that CVO Pro League and then doing the E-League Season 1 stuff. And that eventually parlayed me into doing I did some stuff with ECS, which was of course Facet's pro league that was competing with EPL for a while, and then it got me to some other like Canadian lands, like Northern Arena was one of them that I did in 2016. And then I started just doing some other random casting stuff. Like when 2017 rolled around, I wasn't really getting as much desk work anymore, but Vince needed a commentary partner. And so all of a sudden I was doing a bunch of DreamHack Opens with Vince throughout the entirety of 2017. But I was still doing desk work like here and there, as it was available, but it wasn't as readily available as it was. But yeah, I just kind of parlayed that into somehow just here and there, kind of mostly is like working in the tier 2 scene, like the DreamHack Open. I wasn't really working like the big IEMs or the ESL ones or the DreamHack Masters or the majors. I wasn't really in the big stuff, but I was fairly consistently working tier 2 up until COVID. And then that kind of changed everything. And then, I kind of, because of that, eventually was away from Counter-Strike for several years.
Yeah, COVID definitely threw a wrench in the entire industry. Threw the wrench in the whole world. Everything got fucked up. But I'm curious to hear a bit about like you being at the desk for the first time, being an analyst. That's got to come with like you got to have balls to do that first and foremost, and second off, like, are you nervous as hell? Like, that's got to be very nervous for the first time, or were you like ready to go? Like, was your career that you were trying to build leading up to this point, you were ready for it?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think I just saw it as another opportunity to make myself have more chances to get to more places, right? The
Okay,
more roles that you can play in a broadcast, the better chances that you're going to get hired to work broadcast, right? So if you're only a host, you're only going to be able to get hosting gigs. If you're only a caster, you're only going to be able to get casting gigs. And back then, yeah, you had a couple of guys who were dedicated analysts who were getting hired for most of the analyst desk, but there was also a lot of events that would like weirdly rotate casters into analyst desk spots at times, as opposed to just having like a permanent desk and like permanent casters. And that would change over time eventually. And people started establishing themselves as analysts. Thorin was one of the big ones early on. Moses eventually, until he became a commentator, was one of the main guys on the desk. And, obviously eventually Yanko comes around, Pimp comes around. These different people kind of come around and start taking those roles. But early on, it was kind of people rotating between casting and desk work. So essentially the point is that I was always a very studious person anyway. I was always a person who prepped really hard, did a lot of research, put a lot of notes together, tried to know as much as I could about all the teams and players to be able to do my job better as a caster. And being on the desk was essentially just taking that same information and stuff that I had learned through my research and whatnot, but just presenting it in a different way and focusing on different things, right? When you're in the game, you're focusing on what's actually happening on the server, the strategy, the tactics, all that stuff. Whereas when you're on the desk, you're more setting the table for the game, setting the key storylines, you're recapping, it's just basically like you're pulling from the same source material, but you're just focused on different areas of it, right?
sure.
And so with the analyst desk stuff, like, was I nervous? Yeah. But at the same time, I wanted the chance to see if I could do it. I wanted the chance to, add that to my resume of things that I'm capable of doing to make myself, more well-rounded and have chances to get more gigs, basically. I still kept my commentary chops up, but I had kind of already seen that, I had hit my ceiling as a commentator. I don't think I was going to ever, get to, tier 1 as a commentator. That was very apparent to me. I was building my way up to maybe doing it in like 2017 timeframe. I was doing all those DreamHack Opens with Vince, but eventually it got to a point where I hit a wall. And it was like, well, I'm either going to have to pivot, or I'm going to, get left behind basically. And so Certainly, it was, I was nervous the first time I got on the desk because my first desk is working with Richard and Thorne, two legends of the desk. That's my first desk. Like, holy shit. You know what I mean? And then, so that was my first desk, right? Is this random CVO Gfinity Pro League event. The first desk I ever do was with Richard and Thorin for a grand finals match.
Dude.
And then my second desk is E League Season 1. So it was insane to and like to just have it be that, but it was just happenstance, like kind of right place, right time. As E League was having to wait on Thorin. There was a spot available for a few weeks, and all of a sudden I'm in Atlanta on working in a TV studio. So yeah, just kind of crazy happenstance. Like, yeah, it was nerve wracking. Yeah, it was tough, but I think I was already someone who had a lot of work ethic, who already thought a lot about the game, who enjoyed the strategical side of the game. And so I was kind of already almost there. I just needed kind of that final nudge and just that opportunity to prove that I could do it.
And when you get thrown, especially from what you're saying, like, just you being at the right place, right time, Thorin's visa situation was kind of cooked, you know, being thrown into into the desk like that, especially with the two legends, I mean, that can make or break someone, like you don't really have much room for error. So, I mean, that must have been a really crazy experience. That's really awesome to hear.
Yeah, it was definitely wild. And I think the other thing that was tough about the analyst thing is, not being a former pro. Like, yeah, I played at a semi-high level in Counter-Strike Source, but I was never a pro Source player or a pro CS:GO player. And, at that time, a lot of the desk analysts were people who had some level of professional experience in Counter-Strike, right? Like, Moses was a former, professional 1.6 player and Go player. Obviously, even guys like Yanko and, yeah, he wasn't like on super top international teams, but he did play at a pro level. He was on the best team from his country and region. He played some international events. Like he does have some of that experience, right? Pimp obviously had a load of playing
Yeah, oh
experience,
yeah.
right? Even Maui Snake is a guy who played at a pretty high level in North America. I don't know if he was ever like in ESL Pro League, but I know he played in the Challenger League and Premier and Mountain Dew League, and like basically right there on the cusp of being a pro level player. So basically, the only like people that have no pro experience that are on desk were Thorin, me, and Bleh for the most part, right? And so
Yeah.
that was the other thing is like, well, do I even have the credibility and resume to be someone that people want to hire for desk? And that's still a question that's debated today. Who should be on the desk more? Should it be more former pros? Should it be other people who are just good at the job and understand, what the desk should be and be entertaining, but also be informative? It's, who knows, right? But yeah, I think basically kind of throughout Go until I ultimately stepped away from Counter Strike for several years. I was just bouncing around and just taking whatever opportunity came my way. And there was definitely periods of time where I thought it was all over. There was definitely, stretches of months where I wasn't doing anything, and I'm like, maybe I should go do something else. I even did start doing something else. I got an EMS license, was working on an ambulance
Oh
part
wow.
time while I was waiting for gigs and stuff like that. So I mean, I was through the ringer there for several years where, I was getting some work, but it wasn't super consistent. It wasn't really enough to call it like a full-time job. And then, yeah, ultimately, it eventually led to me, leaving Counter-Strike in like 2020, 2021. So, yeah.
And that's the scary part too. I'll touch on it quick since we're talking about it, but Anders kind of dealt with the same thing for a little bit there too. He just wasn't getting any gigs. He was confused about it. He didn't understand why. Like he almost felt like he was blackballed, he was saying. Like it's a scary reality, and it's such a competitive, atmosphere now with once people cement their names on certain broadcasts, like good luck beating them out, It's once people like those people, the tournament organizers are going to want to keep them. To introduce new people is like probably they look at it as a risk.
Oh, absolutely. Right. I mean, that's something you're always battling against is like, once a TO forms a relationship with a certain group of people who they kind of see as the face of their broadcast, yeah, there's really no reason for them to stray away from that unless something happens that causes them to have to move on from that person. There's obviously been some drama in our scene in the past with broadcast talent that has led to some of those people no longer being a part of the scene. And in those situations, that is then when maybe space opens, or maybe someone just moves on, right? Sometimes you have people just move on, like maybe they move into coaching, or maybe they move into managerial roles, or maybe they, want to get away from the freelancer life and traveling a lot, and they want to get more of a steady job where they can kind of be at home more to, start a family or whatever the case may be, right? So, yeah, it's one of those things where it's like it's perfectly understandable, when you have someone who has a lot of experience and a lot of talent that yeah, they get to keep riding it through, and they deserve to, right? They've
For
worked
sure.
hard to get to that spot, and so they absolutely deserve to keep it. But it is one of those things where it's like when you're on the other side of it and you're someone who's feels like, you're working really hard, you're doing really good work, but you're just not getting the opportunities. It's like, well, there are just limited spots available, bro. And unfortunately, that's just kind of the way the cookie crumbled. And that's kind of what happened with me in Go eventually, I think, is that, as COVID hit and stuff started being more remote and there were less things available to work at, I did find my stuff that as a guy who just kind of fell through the cracks. I didn't really have a home. Like DreamHack was probably the closest thing I had to one as far as like someone that I work with consistently. But, even that became a little bit, rough at the end. And then obviously they eventually get acquired by ESL. And so now it kind of becomes an ESL product and they kind of have their crew, and then Blast kind of had their crew already. And it was really a 2 TO front at that point. Like I guess Starladder was around a little bit. But yeah, I mean, at that point, if you're not a part of one of those groups, you're kind of on the outs. And that's ultimately what happened to me, at least.
Yeah, it's scary. But on the bright side, this is like a major step forward in your career. We're talking 2024 now. But the Shanghai major with Perfect World, I'm really curious to hear about, how that whole experience was, because I think that was the first major ever in China, obviously, right?
Yeah.
So, Perfect World, I think they did a great job. Obviously, I was viewing it from home, but everything was super well done. And I heard that they treated, the talent, dusT talent, analysts, everything. I heard they treated everybody really well, and like the care packages they gave everybody with the kilowatt case and all the cool stuff, like really well done. I'm curious to hear about the whole experience with that.
Yeah, so we didn't get any of that stuff actually. The desk didn't. We were because we were working remotely from the PGL studio in Romania.
Oh
So
man.
so that was people on site that got the cool care package stuff. But PGL was basically the one that was running the English broadcast for it, and so we were doing it from their studio. But yeah, the Shanghai Major thing for me was crazy because basically, like I said, I had kind of had to leave working in Counter Strike for several years, and I was actually working in North American Valorant for several years as a commentator. And what happened is at the end of 2023, after having worked with Riot for the North American pro stuff for Valorant for 3 years, we were supposed to be talking about me doing stuff for 2024. And the initial meeting I had with them was like, everything's good. We're good to go. We'll send you a schedule. Like, we'll figure it out. We'll see you back for 2024. And then all of a sudden, 5 days later, that turned into actually, we don't need you anymore. So you're shit out of luck.
Wow.
And it's like, well, what happened? Like, how did things change so rapidly? I still to this day don't know. But basically,
What?
fuck Riot Games is basically all I have to say at that point. Like,
Yeah.
it was a really shitty situation where I got totally misled into thinking that I had a job for the next year. Into all of a sudden, out of fucking nowhere, they were like, "Yeah, never mind." Basically, so I was like, "Oh." And this is the point in time where I was working on the ambulance as an EMT part time because at least it was consistent income, right? And it was also flexible. Like the ambulance service I worked for, if I needed time off to go work an event, they'd give it to me because I was a part timer anyway, right? It wasn't a full
That's
time thing.
huge.
Uh, so that really helped. But so all while this is happening, so this is the end of 2023 when these conversations are happening between me and Riot. And then out of nowhere, bro, I still to this day don't exactly know how it happened, but PGL just sends me an email and they're like, "Hey, would you like to come work the RMRs for the Copenhagen Major?"
Wow.
And I'm just like, bro, I haven't worked in Counter Strike in like 3 years. Like, how in the hell is someone offering me a Counter Strike gig on an analyst desk at that for RMRs so this is the first CS2 major, obviously the Copenhagen major.
Mhm.
And I was like, bro, what? And I think part of it is that obviously PGL had kind of stepped away from Counter Strike for a couple of years there, if I'm not mistaken, after their Stockholm major or something like that. But they always had a good relationship with Valve because they do TI, obviously. And so they were coming back into Counter Strike for this Copenhagen major, and I had worked with PGL in the past for like the minors for the Boston major. I think PGL was like operating some of that stuff. And so they knew who I was because I had worked with them before, but I hadn't spoken to them in years, right? And like I said, I'm not sure if it's just they were coming back in the CS and they were looking to bring people back they had worked with before that they knew, did good work or whatever. I think also part of it was Richard Lewis probably, because him and I were, still in contact all the time, still good friends, and he was going to be the host of these things, and so I think that kind of helped me get my foot in the door as well. That he was going over there and maybe he recommended me. I don't really know. But anyway, the point is I do the RMRs for the Copenhagen Major for America and Asia. It goes pretty well. They obviously go on to do the Copenhagen Major. That's brilliant. But then I don't really do anything after that except
Man.
for some stuff online randomly. Like I do a couple of like online, like like the classic CCTs and like TWCs and like all these little online cups. I did a couple of those. I kind of use the Copenhagen RMR work to reach out to these people and say, hey, I just got finished doing the RMRs. Do you need any casters or anything? Like I know I was like, because now at this point I knew that if I was going to stay in esports, it was now or never. Like this was it. Like I either needed to make like that Copenhagen RMR thing turn into something, or I was going to be gone and I was going to be, either working on the Analyst the rest of my life or finding a new career or whatever the case may be. But then all of a sudden, PGL, after having worked with them at the RMRs, 8 months later, so 8 months after I worked the RMRs with Copenhagen Major, they invited me to do the Shanghai RMRs. And I was like, okay, yeah, awesome. At least I'm getting to work with them again. Like apparently maybe we're building the relationship here, right? And so I was hired for the RMR, so I knew I had that coming up. And then it was a couple of weeks later, they were like, hey, would you be willing to work the major too? And it's like,
Oh yeah.
obviously. I mean, this is a dream I've been chasing for like 12 years to work a major. And I never even got close. Like I did some minors, I did some qualifiers and stuff, but I was never really in the running to actually work a major. So to go from chasing after a dream for like 10 to 12 years, never reaching it, moving away from Counter-Strike for 3 years, and then all of a sudden getting one, I was like, what the like, it's just one of those crazy things that you're just like, wow, like I got kind of fortunate there. But I feel like, I made the most of it. And yeah, the Shanghai Major was probably, the biggest endeavor I've ever done because essentially I had to go from not working in Counter-Strike for a long time to, I think I had to prep for 52 teams because
Wow.
I did the American RMR, I did both European RMRs because back then there were so many teams they would split up into two European RMRs, and then the major itself. So
That's
I mean,
crazy.
I basically went to like the hyperbolic time chamber for like months and was just like in the demos, in the stats, like just preparing as much as humanly possible. And luckily, the Shanghai Major just turned out to be excellent. Like it was a little bit tough. Like I said, we worked it remotely, so I'm flying from North America Central Time to, Romanian time to work on China time. So it was a very wild schedule. We were getting up at like 3 o'clock in the morning and like working
Ugh.
from like 4 a.m. to 11 a.m. and then, rinse and repeat every day. But obviously it's my first major, bro. Like nothing was going to phase me. Like nothing was going to piss me off. Nothing was going to annoy me, bro. Like
Yeah, oh yeah.
I'm just stoked. Right. And, so yeah, obviously the Shanghai major was incredible. I got to work the desk all the way through. I even got to cover like a couple of quarterfinals and a semifinal. So I was part of playoffs, which is crazy. Never would have expected that. My first major. And luckily for me, that kind of sealed the deal, as far as forming a relationship with PGL, which obviously led me to working with them regularly throughout 2025. And obviously I've done Cluj this year as well. So yeah, hopefully, this is kind of where I finally am able to get some steady footing again.
That's awesome, man. And like I think it needs to be talked about more, like, going from like Counter-Strike and then going to Valorant and then having to go to an actual, like, I don't want to say an actual job, but you know what I mean? Like a
Get your point. Yeah.
normal career. And then just randomly going back to Counter, like when you're doing all of this juggling, like, are you still involving yourself with the Counter-Strike space? Or are you like, fuck that, I'm not even worried about it. It doesn't even seem like people care about me over there. Like, I couldn't even imagine having to juggle all that. Must be insane.
I mean, obviously, when I was working in Valorant, I was pretty locked into North American Valorant. I was still keeping up with Counter Strike to some degree, not as much as I had before. I wasn't focused on every single tournament and every single game, back when I was trying to regularly be a part of the scene. But I'd still pay attention to some of the big tournaments and at least like see who was winning. I'd pay attention to some like big roster news or whatever. I even still, Richard Lewis does like the whole No Majors Club broadcast. Like, kind of, I was a part of that a few times as like a guest, just coming in and hanging out, watching the major. So I mean, I still had, somewhat of a finger on the pulse of Counter Strike the entire time I was in Valorant, but I wasn't really ever fully committed to it or anything like that, right? Like I always left the door open. Like in a dream world, I would have worked both games simultaneously because that would have maximized the amount of work I could do. That would have made me a multi-game, broadcaster, which always looks good. It proves that I can do more than just one thing, which can be nice for certain clients and stuff like that that you're maybe trying to pursue. But it became pretty apparent early on that that wasn't going to happen because there was just not much interest from TOs and Counter Strike to bring me on board. And so I was like, okay, I'll just focus on Valorant because I legitimately did like that game, right? I mean, there's been plenty of times where I could have tried working another game alongside Counter Strike, but I just didn't do it because I just didn't like the game. And Valorant was one of the few times where it's like I actually do enjoy this game. Like I actually can kind of get into it and understand it. And so that's what I did. And then when Counter Strike wasn't an option anymore, I focused fully on Valorant. But like I said, I always kind of, at least kept my eyes on Counter Strike. I was still somewhat understanding what was going on in the scene. And then, once that Copenhagen RMR opportunity came in 2024, I was locked in again, and that was my full focus. And, you know, I was obviously still, working the ambulance job, obviously, and I was doing other little small odd jobs here and there to make ends meet. And I think I'm also fortunate that, I have a fiance who she has a great job. We live in a very low cost of living area. That made it easy too. She was fully supportive of what I was doing, which was awesome.
That's
And
huge.
so that obviously gave me a little bit of a foundation as well to where I could kind of gamble a little bit, I guess you could say, on taking a chance. Because when I had that meeting with Rod at the end of 2023, like in my mind, I was done. Like I was esports, I'm out. And I was
That's a
gonna
tough pill to
go.
swallow.
Yeah, I mean, and like I was miserable when that happened. Like, because there was just so much stuff I felt that like I hadn't accomplished yet that I wanted to. Call it stubbornness, call it the sunk cost fallacy, call it whatever you want. But it's just like, man, I feel like I still have more to give. I think I'm still good at this. Like I still love this. I still want to do this, but there's just no way to, right? And like I said, I was pretty much ready to wrap it up. And then when PGL reaches out for those RMRs, it changed everything. And so yeah, I
Crazy.
latched onto that chance. I did the best job I could. I spiraled it into doing more stuff with PGL, and now I'm just waiting to see what happens next, right? I mean, that is kind of the life of a freelancer, right? I mean, I guess for some of like the top duos and top analysts, you kind of know that you're probably going to get regularly hired in some form or fashion, and you could maybe somewhat feel stable. But even those guys, I'm sure there's some stress and wondering like when's the next gig coming.
Hmm.
Whereas, for someone like me who's not quite at the tippity top, it still is just very much like a month to month thing, bro. I think, I can't divulge too much, but I was a little bit fortunate this time around that PGL signed people to like multi-event agreements for this year, at the end of last year. So I kind of at least knew I had some stuff I'm going to do this year. And that's really the first time I've ever had like a stuff guaranteed to me in advance, basically, where I could be like, oh, okay, at least I know I got these coming up. Um, but yeah, it's working out right now, and we'll have to see how it goes, I guess.
It's good to hear. And the whole multi-event agreement, sorry. I like that needs to be more standard, I think. Like I don't think it's fair for, people, I don't want to say people to be used for their talent, but like, that's it's part of the whole partnership. So like they have the broadcast and they need you for your talent. So if they're stringing you along event to event, I just think that's kind of just fucked up.
I mean, it's one of those things where, you know, there's pros and cons to it, right? Like, obviously, from my perspective, it's amazing because that means I get guaranteed work. And so I don't have to stress about whether or not an email is coming to my inbox randomly one day to invite me to an event, right? Like, I kind of know, hey, I at least have these things that I can plan on. And maybe I get some stuff added throughout the year too. And that's just kind of icing on the cake. But at least I got this thing I know that I can do and I can plan my life around that schedule and know what kind of money I'm going to be getting for the most part, which can kind of plan my finances for the year. And
For sure.
it's basically just like a total win in that regard. But from a TO's perspective, it's one of those things where maybe locking yourself in with a particular group of talent for an extended period of time can be tricky because like what if something goes wrong and you need to move on from that person, but you've already signed them to a contract, right? Like I get it from that perspective, like because as a TO, you kind of have to keep your finger on the pulse on what's going on, what makes sense. Maybe you feel like you need to make a change to make your product better, whatever. I can kind of understand it from that regard. Wanting to keep things fresh, wanting to give new people chances, maybe wanting to spice things up a little bit by bringing in a special guest. Like I can kind of see it from both ways, but I do think in the long term it becomes beneficial because then you can build a product together, right?
Yeah.
Like you kind of become I don't you kind of become the face of their product in a way, and you get to collaborate more. Like for example, when PGL kind of showed some loyalty, I guess you could say, by hiring me for multiple events and keeping in touch with me for these last couple of years, that motivates me more to want to go above and beyond and
Absolutely.
maybe help them do things I wouldn't normally do. So like for example, PGL, I help them with some production stuff now behind the scenes.
Oh,
Um,
wow. That's
uh,
interesting.
like not like you're thinking maybe like running the board or something like that in the background, but have you seen like the PGL like motion graphics for like map positions and stuff like that we use?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I helped them build a database to do that. So, but the only reason why I did that was because I knew these people were invested in me. So I'm now invested in helping make your product better, right? And I think you just form consistency too. Like you form chemistry with these people, and that's going to make the show better because now everyone knows how everyone operates, what people like to do, what people don't like to do. You kind of understand the personalities that you're working with and their strengths and weaknesses, and how you guys blend together and what can put together the best product. I mean, the reason why PGL's desk are I think really good is because we all have so many reps together now.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
if you keep that group together, they're going to be able to keep getting more reps. They're going to keep building more experience with each other. They're going to keep getting more comfortable working with each other. And it's just going to get better and better and more efficient as time goes on, as those people continue to work together. So I think it's definitely a bonus, kind of on all fronts for the most part. But, I also understand that maybe you do want to try something different here and there, get somebody else a chance. Maybe a player retires. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. Like, I don't know, what if Kerrigan retires next week and wants to try working on the desk?
Yeah.
Obviously, he should probably get, a chance.
Who's
Now,
going to
we
say
know
no
that,
to him, you know?
yeah, yeah. So it's one of those things where, like, yeah, I get that you want to leave room for the option to try some new things or to change things up a little bit. So it is what it is.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to talk about is kind of sort of on the same path that we're talking on. I think the whole balance of personal life and work life and the whole maybe like mental aspect of like, am I gonna get that email? Am I gonna get hired this year? You know what I mean? I think that whole thing doesn't really get talked about a lot, and I think it should. If you're willing to share anything about that, like, I think that'd be pretty cool to talk about, just, balancing all of that. I'm sure it's not easy at all.
No, it's not easy at all. Like I said, this year was a little bit easier because, like, at this point, I've been working with PGL pretty consistently for 2 years. And so I feel like I have somewhat of a rapport with them at this point, and it seems like we'll continue to do stuff together going forward. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the time, depending on where you're at on the totem pole, I guess you could say, of broadcast talent, again, I think at this point in time, I can't speak for them, but if you're a member of one of the top 3 or 4 commentary duos in the game right now, you're probably going to be all right, right? Like you probably know you're going to get a decent amount of gigs throughout the course of the year. Nothing's guaranteed, of course. Things could change. Random banana peel could pop up. But for the most part, you kind of know I should be all right. And the same could be said for like your top 3 or 4 desk analysts, that get hired pretty consistently. Kind of the same thing, right? But at the same time, even those people sometimes do wonder, like, am I going to get hired for the next major or not? That's probably one of the biggest ones. Like almost like no major is guaranteed, to
Yeah.
anyone technically, right? And so that's probably the one that lingers over your head. But again, there are cases. I'm not going to speak for other people, but there are cases from other TOs where maybe you will sign like a 1 year agreement or maybe a 2 year agreement, to where you kind of know I'm going to get some pretty steady work, from this TO for at least the next season or 2 seasons or whatever the case may be, right? But for the people not quite at that level, then yeah, you kind of are just living by if your inbox hits something new when you wake up in the morning or not, right? Like it can be really stressful in that regard. And to some degree, I still kind of find myself in that position. But again, I feel like at this point, I've proven I'm capable. And again, at the very least, I feel like right now, PGL and I are on good terms. And so I at least have that kind of going for me. But yeah, it is certainly stress. I mean, that's for any freelancer job.
Yeah,
Any
absolutely.
freelance gig or contractor based gig, you're not guaranteed a salary, you're not guaranteed a place of employment. And so there is always that chance that maybe you don't get picked up the next event or the next major or the next season or whatever the case may be. So yeah, it's definitely stressful. You know, to this day, I ran like sometimes you'll just randomly get a message on Discord or an email and be like, hey, you want to come work this event? It's like, oh shit, that's a big opportunity. Cool. Like things can, change very rapidly, I guess you could say. Um, but yeah, it's also one of those things where you just need to make sure that you have, either a backup plan or some kind of safety net, just in case things don't work out. And so that's kind of what I've always had to do. Like there's been so many instances throughout my career where I've gone long since without work that I've kind of understood that, hey, I need to either have another job I can go work if I'm not getting hired for gigs, or, maybe I need to pivot into a different industry, perhaps if things start to kind of fold, or, you know, be very frugal with my money, make sure I'm saving up just in case I hit, a bad stint. And so it's just all about, giving yourself a safety net, giving yourself multiple options. Obviously, commit hard to what you really want, right? I mean, you got to put your best foot forward every time you go out there. So you have to, you know, make sure that you got your game face on and that you're preparing and that you're ready to go. But yeah, just kind of understand that, I think the other big thing that you're seeing people do is diversify. Like not only are you working on broadcast, but maybe you're starting up your own YouTube channel, your own Twitch
Yeah,
stream, or maybe you're writing articles for a website, or, maybe you're doing some other kind of content work for some other company. It's about, diversifying to give yourself, there's a reason why you're seeing some of these guys create podcasts, or, because they know that, hey, let me, diversify what I'm doing here to give myself better standing. And so that's part of it as well.
for sure, man. Well, that was the last question I had for you. Awesome stuff. I really appreciate the time. For the outro of the podcast, I always like to shine the guest over, or sorry, shine the spotlight over the guests. And if you have any last words, any advice, anything you want to say, floor's yours.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just say, shout out to all the different people in the Counter Strike world who have helped me or supported me in some way. There's a lot of you out there, whether you're just fans of the game or fellow broadcast talent I work with, or people that work with TOs who have hired me, or whatever the case may be. I just appreciate, all the support and stuff that I've gotten, and I hope to just keep going. Obviously, a shout out to you for having me for this interview. You have a great collection of interviews, I'll say. Like you've
I
interviewed a
appreciate
lot
it.
of lot of really cool names in the scene. I think, like I said, I found your channel because of your Maui Snake interview, but I've also seen like your interviews with like Professor and Striker and some of the other guys. So yeah, it's cool that you have like you're building a nice collection here of interviews, I guess is kind of what I'm getting at, that I think are kind of timeless, right? Some videos it hits hard right away and then it kind of fizzles out, whereas I think these interviews are timeless. People can listen to them a year from now and they'd still have value.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
so, so I think it's really cool stuff, and yeah, just appreciate you having a talk with me. It's a good time.
Alrighty, guys, that will do it for today. Really, really cool hearing more about the behind the scenes of how the industry kind of works. So again, mega shout out and hats off to dusT for joining us today. That is all I have for you guys, though. We will be coming back next week with another cool episode. We will catch you guys then. Have a great Friday. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you next week. Till next time, everybody.